it's for real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Nostalgia Crackdown here on Let's Get Ready Network. I'm Adelia, and that's my buddy Josh, and this month we are here to discuss the history of the Fyffe Club. Josh, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here, and we got a doozy of an episode coming up, so stay tuned. There's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. What are your, looking back on it now, initial thoughts when someone brings up the Fyffe Club?
It's interesting because when we talk, I remember there was a lot of talk about Schmoedown Legacy when in a lot of previous seasons, but the Fyffe Club isn't mentioned as much because their run is very, very short compared to all other factions, and you can argue they've accomplished so much in such a short amount of time, where they should be up there and they should be talked about, but they don't. It's such a it's almost like you blink and you miss it based on how short it was. And they did, and as we'll go over, they accomplish so much. But when we're talking about the history of the Schmoedown, we're talking about around 9 seasons, I believe. And with that, so much has happened. We've had factions like the Den, the Lion's Den, Dagnino's factions that's been around since the beginning of time. The Founding Fathers have been around much longer than the Fyffe Club. Same with Corruption. Even the factions introduced in the newer digital era of the Schmoedown, like Swag and the Quirky Mercs, are all longer and have more history than the Fyffe Club.
Yes, the Fyffe Club were just in season 5. Formed at Spectacular of season 4 with the Manager Bowl match that Emma Fyffe won. We'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, they were just that one season, and then they were disbanded because Emma became one of the commissioners of the league. But they accomplished so much in that short span of time, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. So, Josh, where should we start?
Let's start at the Manager Ball, where it all began. We heard that Emma was going to be a manager, which was always very interesting because she was a great player, and her transitioning to manager made a lot of sense. And she had this mystery contestant. I believe that the player was wearing a mask of some sort during the whole Manager Ball. So one of the mysteries of the match is who is Emma's mystery competitor that she got. And we had some cutscenes like, oh no, I got a competitor. I got a big competitor. And Emma ends up winning the Manager Ball, which is huge. It gives one of her competitors a number 1 contender shot. And the mystery competitor ends up being Marc Andreyko, who is currently managed by Tom Dagnino. He ends up leaving the Dagnino's Den specifically because he did not feel good about how they dealt with the Cushing situation in that teams match, 2 versus 1.
Yeah, I remember that being a big reveal. Like I don't remember who I thought it was, but I didn't think it was Andreyko. But I thought it was really cool that Andreyko broke away from the Den and had joined Emma, and that led into the next season where we ended up having 3 more members of the Fyffe Club, but only 2 of them ever played. Sam Witwer was a blink and you miss it member of the Fyffe Club. He never played again once he joined the Fyffe Club. But and then Rachel and Clark, obviously, are the other 2 members of the Fyffe Club that everyone remembers. And let's get into the matches that the Fyffe Club played. Josh, where should we start?
Let's start with the singles division. And it's interesting because we don't remember the Fyffe Club for singles because the singles is the only belt they've never won as a faction. They never won the singles belt. But despite that, they got all their competitors to a championship match. Clark played against Sam Levine and lost. Rachel played against Sam Levine and lost. Although Rachel got to the match because of her number one, because she got second in the tournament, I believe. So she got a number one contender match, and I think at Spectacular she played a no, I don't think it was Spectacular actually, but so it was interesting because going into it, not only did when the club was first introduced, they had Rachel Cushing, who already had a number one contender match when she signed with the Fyffe Club, I believed. Um, Emma also had a number one contender match on her belt that she gave to Clark Wolf instead of Marc Andreyko. A lot of that was a big surprise during the day because everyone thought, well, Andreyko was the first to join. You'd think that like he'd get the number one contender match after. You'd think that was part of how maybe Emma even signed Andreyko, was like, hey, I'm going to win this manager ball and I'm going to get you that number one contender match. But it was, I remember being shocked that she gave it to Clark, but Clark was able to win that match against Mike Kalinowski, which, by the way, fascinating because that is the birth of corruption right there, is Kalinowski losing to Clark Wolf. So you could already make an argument that match alone had so much historic impact on the Schmoedown. But you look at just in singles, all Ethan Irwin was. Sorry, Marc Andreyko was able to beat Ethan Irwin, get his championship match against William Bibiani when Sam Levine retired. Which, again, it's interesting because it's like a lot of getting really, really close in singles, but not getting there. Clark Wolf also had a number one contender match against Dan Murrell at the Spectacular of season 5. She ended up losing. There's a lot of moments where you're seeing in they're getting so close. I think Clark Wolf again. This is the same season she played Ethan Irwin in the tournament, and that she lost against Ethan Irwin in the tournament. This and I think that was the match where South Side by Me, or I always forget the exact wording of the South Side by Me or You. But I think that was that match. Clark Wolf almost beat Ethan Irwin and won the tournament. There's a lot of very memorable singles matches and single success, which within the history of the Fyffe Club, but it almost always gets forgotten because they never are the victor in the end when it comes to the championship belts. They got 0 belts out of it, but a lot of turning points within those singles matches, whether it was the birth of corruption with Clark beating Mike, whether it was Clark almost beating Ethan. And also, you look at Sam Levine's historic run that has arguably made him the GOAT. A lot of that run was against the Fyffe Club, and the reason why that run was oh um, so amazing was because the Fyffe Club was that amazing, and Sam was able, despite the Fyffe Club being the dominant powerhouse, Sam Levine was just better, or at least in those matches, just a tiny bit better, and he was able to just stop the Fyffe Club from getting a singles belt.
Absolutely. The three competitors in the Fyffe Club, Mark, Rachel, and Clark, were all phenomenal singles players. And it showed really with Emma as their manager, like Emma, underrated manager, I think, in the league. Like everybody talks about who are the greatest managers of all time. You get Shannon Barney, Dagnino. I think Emma is up there, even though she wasn't a manager for as long as everybody else, just simply based on all the success that the Fyffe Club had. Now, they didn't end up with that singles championship, like you said, but it's phenomenal to get 3 players from the same faction to championship matches in the same division in the same season. And Emma did that as a manager. So they were, I really enjoyed watching the Fyffe Club matches because they were always competitive. And they were very, very knowledgeable competitors. They're 3 of the best competitors we ever saw.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's easy to think that like she was inheriting this super team because you are looking at Andreyko, Wolf, and Cushing, all in the conversation of like Cushing and Clark are obviously top 10, and Draco's around the 15 to 20 mark, give or take a couple, but like you think that they were already made, but if you remember, Clark didn't have she had a lot of initial success as a rookie, but did kind of like had some rough seasons before going to the Fyffe Club, and just like couldn't get back to the championship after after her loss to Dan Murrell, I believe. And also with Rachel had a lot of success as well, but also was 1 and 2 in IG and in teams. There was moderate success, and as we transitioned into teams, they they weren't they weren't the legends that they were. Not even close. And in one season, they became instant legends within the Schmoedown, especially once we go into the teams division and the birth of the Shirewolves.
Absolutely. The Fyffe Club, it is noted on the Collider Wiki, the Schmoedown Wiki, had the most number one contender matches during season 5, and I can believe that because it seemed like they were always going deep runs in tournaments, playing those big matches, the number one contender matches, and then like we said, get them all to championship matches. That's really impressive.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not only did they get those number one contender matches, but they were able to convert on those. Like the Finstock Exchange, I remember in their heyday, they got a lot of competitors to number one contender matches, but it almost like was like a running thing where they would get to the number one contender match and then lose. But that didn't happen with the Fyffe Club. You expect them to win every single match, even when. Yeah, I remember Sam Levine when they were playing Sam Levine. I'll be honest, I think I chose Clark and Rachel in both those matches against Sam Levine, and that wasn't because I was underrating Sam Levine. The Fight Club was just a dominant force, and you just never expected them to lose. And now let's move on to the teams division with the Shirewolves. And really, this is the only team that the Fight Club ever had because there were only 3 members. They never got Andreyko a partner. They probably would have in the next season if the faction stayed together. But the only team that comes out of this is the Shirewolves, and they are arguably the greatest team of all time. They're in that discussion with the Patriots, with Shazam. They're up in that conversation. And if someone told me that they think the Shirewolves are the greatest team of all time, I wouldn't blink. And again, it's only one season of work, but it was a very dominant run. Despite there were some easier opponents to begin with, but they had team action, which was an extremely tough team in my opinion. And then once you got the defenses, they defended against critically acclaimed, a powerhouse of a team. And once you look at the teams they defended against, I'm just going to double check I get these teams right because um,
Well, they won the titles to begin with against Brian Chandler and that guy Brian that we never saw again.
that was a weird championship match, I will say. I
That
do.
Yeah, that was. I mean, let's be real. That was engineered. Brienne cashing in her free for all title shot simply to get a female champion in the Shimoda.
Yeah,
Because either one of those teams winning meant we would have had our first female champions uh, that were not Mara Knopic.
I, I,
Or
I, I'm perfectly fine with that. I just really, really wished Brienne chose anyone else, and that's not to say anything about, but it's like it's a championship match, and it's a really tough debut to be. And they were
yeah.
building. I remember they were building it up, like, oh, who's going to be Brienne's partner? Who's going to be Brienne's partner? And there were all these
Mhm.
theories about who Brienne was going to bring. I think the popular one, I think at the time, was Drew McWeeny because McWeeny just lost the belt because of Sam retiring. So it's like what makes the most sense is him playing for the belt in at least some fashion. And then
Yeah.
no, I don't think anyone had I think his name was Brian Bishop as I don't think anyone had Brian Bishop. And
Yeah.
but you look at the other championship matches, let's ignore that one. But
Yeah.
look at the other ones. Who's the boss? And when Who's the Boss was at its hey hottest streak in the tournament, then you look at critically acclaimed. Great team. Odd couple twice, and then lost against corruption. But even then, the corruption match was so close. And it's like after that win against Who's the Boss, and then critically acclaimed, and getting those defenses, and only losing at the end when they're already said either way they're retiring against corruption. It's a great. It's one of the greatest runs of all time. Obviously, it cemented them in history. It cemented both their players in history, and they are arguably maybe the most memorable team I would say in Schmoedown history.
I agree with that. And them winning that first team championship against Brienne and Brian, that also completely changed the way that Anarchy would have looked, because they both would have been in Anarchy with different partners. But because they won and became the team's champs, they weren't in Anarchy, and there were two different teams in Anarchy instead. I forget who it was, but I believe Rachel was supposed to be paired with Andrew Guy, if I'm remembering correctly. I
Yes,
don't
that is
remember who
correct.
Clark was.
I don't remember either off the top of my head, but man, I'm on one sense I'm glad that they host a floor because it would be weird to think about the Schmoedown and not and if Anarchy went a different way, the Shirewolves were only had one run, and Anarchy did a lot of great things for the Schmoedown, but like there are some teams that it might have broken up, and like it definitely worked out in everyone's favor that the Shirewolves stayed together and went on those matches. It really were great champions. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of repetitive almost to talk about them because what can you say other than they were fantastic? They were dominant. They were incredible, and easily one of the best teams we've ever seen.
Yeah, and like not even just mentioning to go off of the matches, but the entrances that Clark and Rachel did were also spectacular back in the time where you could do the really elaborate entrances in the studio. I remember always loving watching and seeing, oh, who are Clark and Rachel gonna dress up as this week? Just phenomenal tag team, two of the greatest of all time, and yeah, that's the teams for the Fyffe Club, because while Andreyko was in the Fyffe Club, he was also in the Odd Couple in the Anarchy tournament. But that's weird because they weren't managed by Emma; they were managed by Roxy, and it's hard to think of that as like Fyffe Club Andreyko, especially since what happened after the Fyffe Club disbanded at the beginning of season 6, and Andreyko went with Roxy and established that team with Snyder um, fully. But they were, that's maybe, um, with the exception of Shannon managing Chance and Mike, Emma and the what she did with getting Rachel and Clark to that pinnacle and keeping them there is one of the more impressive teams runs that we saw. But even then, I don't think Emma was the manager for all of the defenses that Clark and Rachel had. I think maybe because of the Anarchy tournament, they only defended the belts once with Emma as their manager.
Yeah, it's definitely like a bit hazy to look back on at some moments because there was so much going on in that season,
Oh yeah,
and
there was a lot going
partially
on.
there was just so much going on, but and that's partially why I almost think there are moments where it feels like the Five Club are forgotten in history because like you look back on that season, there's like so much going on at once, especially during that Anarchy/tournament season. It's like another thing that happened this season was the whole Intergeekdom tournament that Mike Kalinowski started, which, by the way, was the Intergeekdom debut in the Five Club of Rachel Cushing. Rachel Cushing was going into this tournament with a 1-2 record, although already one of the favorites to win the tournament. Maybe the favorite to win the tournament, especially before we saw Mike play and saw how his accuracy skyrocketed. But also, Emma was in the tournament as a player, and she did win her first match against Jay Washington, although losing then the next one. So she went 1-1. But going into this tournament, Rachel was 1-2, and then she ended her career at 5-4. Most of her high points, her match against Mara Kanopik that you could watch the episode we just did on last week, her championship, her run to the championship, her battles with Mike Kalinowski, at least the later two, not the first one. Those are all within the Fight Club, and Rachel's rise to be arguably one of the greatest Intergeekdom players of all time, definitely top 5. That's all done within the Fight Club run.
Absolutely. Um, it was interesting to see Emma play in the Intergeekdom tournament. I know she had played before that, and I know that she was a good player in her own right. Don't get me wrong, but I always found it interesting to see managers playing when you're used to them being managers. But she showed, at the end of that season in the Commissioner Bowl that she was a quality player in singles. She took on what Finstock, Thad, and Christian, and won in sudden death on a burlesque question, I believe it was, which got her the gig as the commissioner for teams and Inner Geekdom the following season. So the Fyffe Club had to be disbanded. Um, she, I think, is one of the more underrated figures in Schmoedown history.
Absolutely, because also not only did she end her career showing off as a player in the commissioner ball, but also at the beginning of her career, the reason she was able to get the number one contender match for Clark Wolf was because she won the manager ball, and the reason why she instantly made a splash was because she won that manager ball to begin. And I think being a player was also what helped almost revolutionize or begin sort of the faction system we see in later seasons, because you look at I I I believe a lot of credit for studying has gone to Ben Bateman, but you could make the argument a lot of that credit should also go to the Fyffe Club. They're basically the first one or one of the first factions that really studied together and really focused on studying the game together and getting better and just focusing on that. Because you look at the factions before that, I don't believe the Horsemen or there's any record of the Horsemen doing that before matches to the extent that the Fyffe Club did. I'd be shocked if the Lions Den in their heyday did any of that, or at least did that to the extent that like later seasons in the Fyffe Club did. And you look at a lot of the later seasons, especially the digital ones and the more faction focused ones, you could see the Fyffe Club's like fingerprints or inspiration all over those factions based on how they're studying together, the atmosphere, the community, or at least how much they were pulling for one another. It really was a if you look at also if you just look at impact, I would say the Fyffe Club is the most impactful faction in Schmoedown history. I believe that like in so many ways the Fyffe Club, the Schmoedown is not the same or even close to the same without the Fyffe Club in it.
I would agree with that. They definitely made one hell of an impact in the short time that they had together. And imagine if Whitwer had kept playing and we had that Whitwer Damon Star Wars match that everybody wanted to see. Emma could have made an impact in the Star Wars division as well. Um, I love the Fyffe Club. I had a Fyffe Club T-shirt back in the day, and the Emma has always been one of my favorites to follow, just in the space in general. But definitely loved all of the members of the Fyffe Club, and I think that it's sad to me in a way that they don't get the Fyffe Club doesn't get the due that I feel they're deserved, because we did have the success of more success of a female manager down the line in Shannon Barney, and we had the success of all the different factions at once going on during the faction era, in season 7, 8, and 9, and it's kind of like the pioneers are forgotten because Emma wasn't one of those managers.
It's partially that, but I really do think a lot of it is just how short the run is. When you look at, I think this is a bit of a sports thing when you think about legacy, and when you think about dominance within sports, it's always within multiple seasons. The
Mm-hmm.
Patriots, the Warriors, the great dynasties are always within multiple seasons. We always talk about the great one season wonders, but not in the same way as the dynasties. But what's weird with the Schmoedown is even within one season, I think you can have a dynasty within one season, and it's a bit of weird because we have dynasties that are across all these seasons. Whether it's corruption, whether it's you could make the argument for the founding fathers, the Lions Den, or even you could even combine Lions Den and Finstock Exchange as just a Dagnino dominance as a manager in a sense. But like the Fyffe Club, to put in sports terms, had the greatest season of all time, and then decided the whole team retired before having a second season. So it's like I think it would be very obvious if Clark and Rachel and Marc Andreyko all continued next season or had a couple seasons. We'd talk about them easily because they'd have more success. They would be at least in the conversation for belts almost every single kind of title run or whatever. But because it's only one season and because it's a one hit wonder, and not because of they couldn't do it again. They could obviously do it again, but because after one season that they retired, it's weird to talk about them legacy wise compared to other dynasties that lasted multiple seasons, because also it's very tough to it's a different type of challenge, and it's always sustained dominance is very hard to do. And I believe the Fight Club could obviously have done it, but it, we all this I feel like the multi-season dominance is always going to just leave more impact in your head no matter how great the one season was. But I think if you look at it just statistically, whether you look at it just through the season, Fight Club accomplished so much. Where even in that, if we were talking about top 3 or top 4 factions of all time, Fight Club's obviously there. I'm not sure how many number ones, how many greatest faction of all times people would give them, and I'm not even sure if I would give them that title yet, just because of how it is only one season. But they're definitely in the conversation, and they're definitely comfortably in that top 5, probably in the top 3, probably in the top 2 even. But it is an interesting legacy debate to talk about just because it's one season.
Yeah, and it's hard to think off the top of your head of a faction that were in more championship matches in one season than the Fife Club was in their season. The 3 singles championship matches, the teams win. I think the one defense they got in because of the Anarchy tournament. I almost wish that their season didn't happen to line up with the Anarchy season, because I think that so much more could have happened there, with the Shirewolves and teams in that season, if it wasn't for the Anarchy tournament. Even though I love that season, it's maybe my favorite season, the Schmoedown. Um, but Fife Club were pretty damn impressive, and
Absolutely.
I'm glad we took some time today to talk about them.
Absolutely, and just like the impact they had, even if we're talking mostly strategically, but also first women teams champions. Um,
First
uh,
female champions, period.
oh right, I couldn't
Because
remember if Mara was first.
no, Mara was in the Inner Geekdom tournament after the Inner
Hmm.
Geekdom tournament later that year.
You're right. You're right. So first female champions. Um, it was just I'm trying to think if Emma was the first female manager to win a title.
I think
Um,
Emma was the first female manager I can remember.
that is, I'm trying to think of. I'm not sure. Roxy technically was a manager for that Mike at some points, I
For
believe.
like DC movie news, she was like there sometimes, but not all the time. She wasn't like a manager quite yet.
I mean, Grace, if you count Grace in the Lions Den, but it's most people kind of view Tom Dagnino, but I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anyone else, but it- they are definitely the Fight Club are definitely by far the trailblazers of the Schmoedown, and in a lot of ways, they've been a part of historic matches and turning points. Because again, I wonder if Mike Kalinowski beats Clark Wolf in that number one contenders match. Does corruption even happen? Um, does what happens if Marc Andreyko loses to Ethan Irwin? Loses to Ethan Irwin. Does Ethan Irwin just have a dominant stretch the entire rest of the season? Because he definitely looked unbeatable until Andreyko, oh, barely beat him with that 5 pointer, and it was a great match. And then with Cushing, you wonder that if the Shirewolves don't form, what happens with Clark and Rachel and teams? Who do they still come together and become the Shirewolves, or is there another scenario where they choose different partners, and do they still have the same success that Shirewolves had? It's all lot. I, there's just so much to talk about with the Shirewolves when it comes to their history, and I think their fingerprints are just riddled all over Schmoedown history, and if you look at all the future seasons, you can make the argument that a lot of it is really inspired or I don't want to say base, but a lot of it comes, or at least originated, you can make the argument, from the Fyffe Club.
Absolutely. So shout out to Emma and Mark and Rachel and Clark for putting on one of the greatest seasons of the Schmoedown we ever saw.
Absolutely.
Josh, where can the people find you?
They can find me here. I'm right now focusing on Nostalgia Crackdown. And I'm very excited for our next episode, because our next episode was actually going to be from a fan comment. So we really, really like this comment, this idea. So we're going to go ahead and do have that topic be the next Nostalgia Crackdown focused one. So that's the tease I'll give. I'm really excited to do that one. Please follow LGR. They're doing a bunch of great stuff on Patreon, on this channel, bunch of great content. And the people around LGR are great people. So listen, just support LGR. And that's right now the only thing I'm doing right now.
That's great, Josh. Thank you for that. You can find LGR on Patreon at patreon.com/LGR_network. $1 a month gets you into the Discord. And at the $15 tier, you can appear on any LGR show that you want. So if you want to come on Nostalgia Crackdown and talk about something with us, that's the way to do it. We will be back next month with another episode. As Josh said, our one that was suggested to us by Leo Logan, I believe. So we will see you then.
It's for real.